All righty, everybody. Thanks a lot for attending today's installment of the Zadara Learning Series. My name is Spencer Nakini, and I'm on the marketing team here at Zadara. I'm joined by Jeff Francis, who is our VP of the Edge Cloud Network here, and he's going to be taking an in-depth look at how leveraging Zadara as a complement to a hyperscaler environment can help you achieve a significant advantage in terms of presence at the edge, compliance, latency, cost of data transfer, and access to global markets. Now, once Jeff has gone through all of that, we blocked off some time for questions at the end. So if you do have anything you'd like us to answer, please drop that into the Q&A, and we'll get to that just as soon as Jeff has done his presentation. However, to ensure that we have enough time, I'm going to hand over the reins to Jeff so we can all get started.
Okay, thank you, Spencer, and welcome everybody. So as you can see from the title slide today, we're going to talk about the edge and how Zadara makes an ideal complement to the hyperscalers. So our agenda today is to just get everything started. We're going to talk about the Zadara Edge Cloud services, and that's for those that are not already familiar with Zadara. And then once we've established that baseline, we're going to go ahead and talk about some use cases that demonstrate where this is a really good complement, both on a technical and architectural level, and then we'll also get around to economics. So what are the Zadara Edge Cloud services? These are enterprise-grade cloud services, the compute, networking, and storage, delivered in an agile model, 24/7 by expert management. This leaves you free to be able to focus on your customer and being able to move your business forward. The three main things to remember is that these are always going to be enterprise-grade, enterprise-rich feature type of services. They are delivered in a fully elastic fashion. So that means they scale in both directions. You can scale up, scale down. You can also scale in and scale out. And lastly, it's a fully managed service that we deliver with really strong SLAs wrapped around that. So already you'll see that there's a lot of commonality behind how Zadara delivers its service. And you might have taken a look at a slide like this and thought, oh, well, this is very similar to how the hyperscalers deliver service. Let's talk about that for a moment. So one thing to keep in mind is that Zadara, we've been in this business for 11 years now, and we have 500 locations around the world that are live with Zadara. So we manage over 500 clouds to 5 nines of SLA. And that high availability is delivered at scale. You can see here, we're in 24 plus countries, over 300 petabytes deployed around the world. And if you take a quick look at distribution of the dots, you can see that we're fairly well covered around the world. And the analysts like Zadara too. So you'll look on here, you'll see Gartner's got their magic quadrants. And we really appreciate them for being able to help size up the market and the industry. So we're both in there for primary storage and hyperconverged infrastructure. You also see IDC in there with a high rating for Zadara. And just to round out the messages here, we also have some messages from GigaOM. And what they've done is they've gone ahead and first of all ranked Zadara as the #1 alternative to AWS S3 object storage. So we are very proud to be able to achieve that particular status. And lastly, when it comes to just storage as a service, this is where we began our heritage back in 2011. We were, again, recently rated to where we were #1 in that space above other good companies you may have heard of before in pure storage, IBM and HP. So now we have a chance to round out what are the Zadara Edge Cloud services. So this is a graphic that it's a little bit busy, but it gives us a chance to talk about that it is, again, compute, network, and storage. On the compute side, we just give an emphasis that these are delivered with an AWS-compatible set of APIs. So there's over 150 API calls that we faithfully emulate. And so we do that because we want to be compatible with some of the tools and some of the training that end users may have for different clouds. We figure we might as well align with one of the best. And so we look at AWS that way. Our model is, again, very similar to the hyperscalers, where it's completely elastic. All the capacity and expansion and security updates and upgrades to software. All of that's on Zadara, just like you experienced today with the hyperscalers. And in a similar way, we're a consumption-based model. So that's where you pay by the hour only for what you use. Now, what's different a little bit about Zadara compared to the hyperscalers is bringing attention towards the left side of the slide here, is that we can bring you infrastructure anywhere that you want it. So we can deliver a cloud in a box on your prem and really deliver that whole promise of edge cloud computing. You can have localization, data sovereignty, things, data where you need it. You can have low latency for really snappy and responsive applications. Or you can also host a Zadara system, some of your Zadara systems up in our public cloud network. We'll have a chance to touch on that later in our presentation today. But with Zadara, you can have it either way. And what's really encouraging about that message is now we start to define where this complement takes place between Zadara and the hyperscalers. Before I leave this slide, I'll just again quickly go through. When it comes to compute, we handle virtual machine hosting. We have all of the intelligent networking wrapped around that with VPC networking, security groups, intelligent load balancers that can inform auto scale groups. All those capabilities you may also be enjoying today at one of the hyperscaler locations. We have those same capabilities. And then underneath the covers of that is a very robust storage as a service in our delivery model. That storage as a service delivers all the major personalities of storage so we can plug into all of your favorite applications. So be it applications that need block storage or file or object, they're all served from the same GUI, the same set of APIs, the same set of automations. So you have one complete stack that does it all. And so now let's segue into the complement between Zadara's edge cloud services and the hyperscalers. We'll use AWS to select for one of those. So what makes us an ideal complement? Well, first of all, AWS is one of the world's largest infrastructures and a very impressive catalog of services. However, there are use cases which still require a local edge cloud, and that's where Zadara comes into the picture. Some of those use cases today for a local edge cloud, well, very simply, virtual desktop infrastructure. This is one of those where persons that are using a VDI type of experience, they'll be latency sensitive. And so where the hyperscalers have done a great job of installing in the United States infrastructure on the West Coast and the Northwest, the East Coast and the Northeast, if you're in the central parts of the United States, you're starting to see 60, 70 milliseconds of round trip latency. And so that starts to add up, and that starts to have an impact on a desktop type of experience. So that's one example of an application. Another one is where we're seeing a lot of machine learning and ML ops type of applications come up where they want to be able to process the data locally and not send gigabytes or terabytes across the wire every day to get it up to a data lake in a central location somewhere. So we see a lot of that processing starting to happen locally, especially now that the infrastructure as a service down at the edge is getting so powerful now, including now GPUs. You see a lot more AI ML processing that can happen at the edge and make things more efficient for organizations. Another use case that we also see today with our Zadara customers is video surveillance cloud. And so this is where it could be private organizations, it could be public organizations looking to consolidate a lot of these high-speed data feeds that you'll get with video, be able to process that information, be able to store that locally. Again, it's not economically feasible all the time to send 4K high-resolution video off across long haul circuits or the internet, whatnot. So video, you're starting to see that be stored and processed locally. And then lastly, a trend that comes from the West Coast, where I'm coming to you from today, is a lot of consumer laws are starting to come out and talk about data sovereignty. Where will they allow personally identifiable information to be hosted? They want to keep that inside the boundaries. It might be a county organization, might be a state organization or other. You'll also see that around the world. We see organizations in Europe starting to pick up on this. It's important to have a solution in your toolkit that can do a local edge cloud. So let's move into a couple of slides that go through what are the advantages by having this hybrid approach. Again, the hyperscalers, tremendous catalog, lots of services. We encourage organizations all the time to be looking at what they can do with the hyperscalers, but also how will they complement that with a local cloud presence. So the first thing that we could point out today is that one of the things you can do in the storage realm when you complement your hyperscalers with a solution like Zadara Edge Cloud Services is that in our storage realm, we have data reduction available, and that's available to our customers, meaning if I were to store information up in one of the hyperscalers, let's say I was to provision 10 terabytes and I were to fill it up with 10 terabytes of data, I would pay for 10 terabytes of consumption. Well, it's been for a long time that enterprise storage area network and network file system devices like a NetApp or a Dell EMC or an HPE have offered data reduction. And so this means that if you have information that can be reduced, so this happens all the time in data lakes, those are just very large swaths of unstructured information. Those would be highly compressible and a lot of duplication of information, so it can be deduped as well. Large shared folders is another one of those use cases where you may have 100, 200 or more users that have large file shares where they're just dumping information up there all every month long in the year. And there really hasn't been any steward of trying to keep that information combed or under control. This is the data reduction realm is an area where you could host those data stores on a Zadara system on a local edge cloud. And just as we mentioned earlier, these enterprise storage systems have been for a long time offering data reduction services. We offer that as well. We can help you receive the benefit of data reduction instead of the hyperscaler, because we know that the hyperscalers are also taking advantage of reducing the data. They have a lot of infrastructure they have to take care of as well. So we're saying that you might as well take advantage of the fact that there's an opportunity to be able to condense or somehow reduce that data. I want to give a quick preview into just a couple slides from now. We're going to talk about the economic side of these things, and we'll retouch on this one. And when we get into the economics of it, we'll have more of a chance to give a quantification of if there is an optimization that can happen, how much can be optimized. So we'll get to that when we get to the economic side. I'm going to move now to auto tiering. This is another one where a lot of organizations would love for their applications to be able to store hot data on a hot tier of storage and cold data that maybe hasn't been accessed in a while, or maybe it's older records. They got to keep that around, but put that on a less expensive tier of storage, maybe a little bit less performant. Well, applications today aren't really getting rewritten quickly enough to be able to take advantage of auto tiering. So with Zadara, we can do that for you. Your application faces a Zadara data store like it always has. Your application thinks it's getting SSD performance all the time because everything it touches turns into a hot bit of data. We keep track of what's hot and what's cold, and we'll go move the data for you to a storage tier where the cold data gets slowed down, put onto hard disks. That's less expensive to store. And so with auto tiering, we can reduce both the footprint of what it takes to store your information. And when we get to the economic side, you'll see that there's a way to reduce the cost to store that information. And remember, what we just said is your application didn't have to change. The storage can do that for you. Again, use cases for that are going to be if you have just a very large area of user folders where they're allowed to upload anything and everything. And you see year over year, your data just keeps mushrooming larger and larger and larger. This is one of the solutions that can help keep that under control. Another one is log files. And so people are keeping log file information around much longer than they used to. There's a lot more data and a lot more value you can get out of that data nowadays. And so auto tiering is another way to make that a more affordable way to do things. The third thing we want to point out today is that dedicated drives is another thing that Zadara can deliver on for you. And so this is how, with many applications sharing the same infrastructure, you might have a couple of noisy neighbors. And so by utilizing a dedicated drive or resource isolation method, this is something that Zadara has a patent around for our multi-tenant solution that gives you a single tenant isolated experience. So you don't have noisy neighbors being able to impact you. You can deliver that type of application quality and that kind of storage experience to your applications and your end users by using Zadara if you were to dedicate drives to a particular tenant. Again, the applications that are most likely to benefit from this, we do find the organizations that use this the most. These are their critical applications. They can't stand a moment of performance issue. They can't stand any downtime. And so this is a solution that lines up real nice with that. As we move on through the advantages here, we'll get into scaling up and scaling down. Now, we all know that in hyperscalers, they have a number of different types of storage that they offer. They offer block services, file services, object storage services. So we're in alignment there. Where Zadara can take you a little bit further is that not only do you define a class of service with Zadara, or the personality of service between file, block, and object, but you can also assign the amount of cache or flash you want to put in front of spinning disks to make that more performance, giving a bigger cache or a smaller cache. You can also increase or decrease the amount of horsepower you want to put into a storage array controller. Now, this will happen all the time in enterprises when you're deploying a new application. You'll spend some time getting it just right, figuring out how much hardware you need to deploy, how much cache is really necessary. The nice thing about a Zadara-powered solution is we are software-defined storage, so you could go in any day of the week and turn the dials and look at the knobs and the graphs and understand how the storage profile is supporting your application. And as is listed on this slide, we have some organizations that for their month-end processing, they need an extra 25% more horsepower on that storage array to be able to get a quick job out of their month-end processing. Well, if you buy a piece of hardware on your data center floor, that means you just have to buy 25% more than your normal capacity, and you own that capacity always. The nice thing about Zadara, again, software-defined storage, you can go into your system with us and just crank the knobs. You can have it for 2 hours, 20 hours, 200 hours. You pay by the hour for what you use. And when you're done with your month-end processing, or you've gotten through a peak time, maybe you've got Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas Day, you've got those type of seasonal fluctuations to your business. When those things ebb and they flow, when they're done, you turn them back down and you start saving money again. Again, the use cases there are we're seeing more and more data lakes being pushed out to the edge. And so data lake is a great place for this, because when you're doing your most intense processing, you can turn your storage into beast mode. And you can afford to do that for 8 hours, get through your processes, and then move on to the next one. But you wouldn't normally think to pay for all that horsepower if you had to pay for that 700 hours out of every month. Then provisioning is an area that I'll touch on lightly here, but for those that have applications which could really benefit from a robust mechanism around snapshots, not just the average that you get with the hyperscalers, but where you have more granularity that you can control. And specifically, if you're running applications that would benefit from clones, I'll point out that VMware hosting is one of those that could benefit from that, but we're not talking about VMware today. We're spending time with the hyperscalers in our topics today. This is another area where you really could have the benefit of thin provisioning. And we get into the economic slides. I'll touch on this one a little bit more. The last thing I'm going to talk about storage today with the performance and architectural advantages is reverse server monitoring. Now, this is an area where, again, if you've got a really critical application, we have a part in our Zadara storage stack that you can turn on reverse server monitoring. And what that does is it goes and you define how often you want to be polled, and it will poll the clients that are using the storage system. What that gives you is two things. One, you can get a baseline for how responsive that network fabric between the storage and those hosts that use it are. So this means if you have a large enterprise environment and you've got a lot of network technology in between point A and point B, this is a method that we designed this so that you could understand on a recurring basis what is the experience with your network communications as it relates to your storage communications. And then, of course, if the thresholds you define have been exceeded, so either there's a downtime or it's exceedingly slow by what you've set up in our system, we'll go ahead and generate a ticket on that. That'll get our 24/7 operations center on the bridge looking at what's going on with your system. And that ticket will also be escalated to you so that you know that there's something going on. This is just another one of those ways that we've made it so that Zadara, we could do a really good job of managing the performance and availability of all the infrastructure as a service. But we also dovetail well with your operational teams around your applications, your databases, et cetera, so that if there is something that slows down, we have a quick identification of where that root cause could be. So now let's take a look at compute. What are some of the architecture and performance advantages that we can deliver there? So it's a very clear message around edge cloud, very low latency. This, again, is something that we're probably about 4 years into this journey at Zadara now, offering edge cloud services. And this is where we've been designing all along to be able to incrementally deliver more and more processing power at the edge, again, graduating even up to GPU. And the ability to just sidestep where before latency was in your way, latency was an issue. Now, by moving that processing out to the edge, you can do those really heavy lifting jobs and you don't have latency to deal with anymore. So just to repeat on the use cases, again, virtual desktop is the easiest one to see and feel with your own eyes. But we do see data processing happening out there. And increasingly now, we also see log analysis. It could be security, SIEM systems, et cetera. Maybe Splunk ingesting some data from network infrastructure and other client devices. That's one of the use cases we see. Another one you're going to find very interesting with Zadara is talking about expanding your reach. And so this is where we've made it very easy for customers to be able to use the Zadara Edge Cloud Network, which at this point, we have 43 locations around the world with full stack of services, where if you were thinking, I'd like to be in Tokyo, Japan, similar to the hyperscaler, you go into a menu, you pick out your city, you start deploying a VPC, you get away, you're working on VMs, you're off to the races. But what if you needed 2 locations inside data sovereignty inside of Italy? Well, the good news is we have 2 locations in Italy. We have Milan and Sicily. And same thing goes again if you want Germany. There's several places in Northern Europe where we've got 2, sometimes 3 in a local geography. So you can start doing some pretty high HA active type of applications. So when it comes to expanding your reach, we've made it really simple to be able to find these edge clouds in these markets that are they're smaller than what the hyperscalers have been able to be able to deliver today. And so when it comes to data residency and compliance, we've got you covered there. And you'll see a picture of our map in 3 more slides from now. Those use cases, by the way, again, about expanding your reach, we see organizations doing video archiving, again, local in region, because these video files are too large to be able to lift and transmit through a high-speed network or internet platform to make that practical. So they process those things locally. Running databases out of the edge is now also practical using our platform. And lastly, you see data processing. Let's move on the conversation now to data egress fees. So this is something that, again, with the hyperscalers, there's been various different considerations that you make around architecting your applications that you host up in the hyperscalers so that you don't have too much data egress coming from the environment, because there would be a fee for that. What we can do for you is we can process information out at the edge so that once that information is processed, you can push that out to your business partners or others that you would normally think from a design perspective, I don't want to do that because I'm going to have that data egress fee every time. Well, now processing data out at the edge and having Zadara out at the edge, we don't have an egress fee charge. You can feel free to design your applications, your partner integrations, and other things that you're doing without worrying about data egress fees. There's another message on here that does touch on VMware. And if you think about it, this makes perfect sense with the hyperscalers. There's a number of applications that want to go to the cloud today. And the question is do I refactor my application? Do I bring in application persons with application expertise to help transform these applications that are hosted on VMware today so that they can be cloudy and cloudified and moved up into the VPC networking model of one of the hyperscalers? Well, here we have another advantage architecture-wise that we can deliver for you, and that is out at the edge with Zadara, we can deliver VMware compatible networking. It's called DVS mode. You might recognize it as distributed virtual switch. So we can be much more familiar to how your applications would face a VLAN-based network infrastructure compared to the cloudy VPC model the hyperscalers offer. Basically, we offer both. And so the same tenant account on a Zadara Edge Cloud system can define projects that the networking world and all the principles of networking will follow the VPC constructs, the API calls will follow VPC, or you can toggle that switch and on a project-by-project basis inside of your tenant account, you can have DVS mode, which again is this throwback to the old way of how VMware would do things with the ESX server. So the reason that's here today is that we're bringing a capability that helps you, that if you desire to bring applications that are still stranded inside of your four walls and you would like to have that pushed up into a cloudy type of solution, you can push that into Zadara and we'll be able to host that for you. The last thing we're going to talk about architecture today with the hyperscalers and then with Zadara with the Edge Cloud is that when you do look at AWS, let's look at that one in particular today, they do have local zones. They have local markets they've created. Boston, Atlanta, Austin, Texas, you know, the list, there's 17 of them in the United States, for example. The challenge with using those architecture-wise is that they've pretty severely limited the VM instance types that you can use out at those edges because they're not as large as those other AWS mega centers, which could be several facilities large in a particular availability zone or region. So what Zadara can help bring to you, if you are using the AWS solution, you've got all your applications up there, you're using their large catalog of services, you can extend a VPN down to a Zadara local edge cloud, and you can go ahead and run a full complement of different types of virtual machines out at the edge, and you don't have to worry about being restricted to a lower number of VM instance types that may or may not fit the bill for what you're looking to do. Now that took us through the architecture and performance side. As I mentioned before, let's now switch into the economics. And so economics, again, putting our eyes for a moment back on storage, we talk about data reduction. What is the real benefit? Is it half? What is it? And the answer, I guess I just led with it already. The answer is it could be half. And it's a direct dependency on if you have a data lake, if you have large shared folders. We know that data like that is very, very highly reducible. When it comes to data lake, you have data compression really comes into play, but data deduplication comes in there as well. I want to touch a little bit deeper on deduplication on our tech stack at Zadara for a moment here. And so we're not just looking, if you give us a file system, you create a file system on top of Zadara, and you have application servers or you have end users dumping files in there. We're not deduping at the file level, we're doing it at the block level. And so that means if you have a file, and maybe the file is going to be 25, 30 gigs large, and somebody modifies that file to where only 2 megabytes have changed. What we'll do is we'll consider that whole large file to be one entity. And so if 6 users have stored that same file, we're going to store it once, and that way we will have deduped it the other 5 times. And when somebody changes just a couple of megabytes on there, that's fine. We're still going to keep pointers. So we have one copy of that large file, and we keep a copy of the blocks that change. The difference I just described is that if we did this at the file level, like some other solutions do, the one person that makes a change to that really large file, they've now splintered off and made their own copy of the file. But with Zadara, you can have 6, 7, 8 people using the same file. And if they're making small point changes, that large file is still just stored once instead of 4 times, 5 times, 10 times. Now you get a sense of where data reduction can really start to lower the size of the footprint of what you need to be able to store all that information. Remember, the storage is doing this for you in the back end. You're not having to configure this. You're not having to explain any of this to the Zadara storage. We just take care of this for you. And as a result, you might find that you only need 50% of the storage fabric that you otherwise would have needed if you were up with the hyperscalers where you don't get the benefit of data reduction, or if you're using solutions that worked at the file level, or a file gateway that's using object storage behind it. That also doesn't get this kind of efficiency. Now on auto tiering, I'm going to say right off the bat, this one does have a little bit of variety of how much you're really going to be able to take advantage of. But to say in the general sense, if you're looking at a large bucket of user shared folders, for example, we do believe that the opportunity to take hot data, which, there are studies out there that talk about for user files, how much data is really accessed and how much data is just kept around until, the kingdom come type of thing. And so that number is 8%. And so with our system, our guidance for people is usually to go 20, 30% of hot SSDs, and then you can do the other 70, 80% in HDDs. And when you organize it that way, your users and your applications, they're going to experience the rapid responses and the effectiveness of SSD type of experience. But what did I just describe a moment ago? Let's even go conservative and do 70, 30. What you did is you paid 70% of all that storage on spinning disks, which is about half the price of SSD for storage, and then 30% on the really fast stuff with the SSDs. And so in that scenario, I will have reduced the cost of my storage by more than 25%. But we can use that today for a conservative estimate to say that auto tiering, where the storage is doing it for you, so the Zadara storage does that for you. Your applications don't have to be told what's going on. Your users don't have to know about it. We take care of that. Now on the drive resource isolation, the drive isolation, this is where we do believe we can save costs against what in the hyperscalers, what they do for noisy neighbors is they allow you to pay a premium for those storage volumes that are going to get that higher level of service. They're called provision IOPS. And so provision IOPS can as much as double the price of a given storage pool that you may have, a couple volumes, etc. I'm not using, today we're not using that for our reference, or you'd be saving more than 25%. We're just saying that if you have an average swath of storage, again, it could be log file ingestion, maybe it's just applications that absolutely positively, you got to make sure the performance is there. They cannot withstand any performance degradation. In those cases, you have to kind of buy all of their storage volumes with provisioned IOPS, and that's where it starts to get really pricey. So we're promoting here that while there are a number of variables, we think we can save about 25% on the cost to store those files for those critical applications, just because drive isolation, that's an ordinary day that ends in Y at Zadara. And that's where we have patents for being able to offer this multi-tenant system with a single tenant experience and no shared resources between the application and the actual drive media themselves. All that's dedicated to individual tenants. And that's why we're able to assure that we can have that level of performance for your critical applications. Moving now on to the storage controller resources. This one also varies. If you have monthly, maybe a month-end procedure, you might run that for 8 hours or something like that. And so your difference isn't going to be that high, because if you did not have Zadara, instead of a month-end close running, churning your books for 8 hours, maybe it would have taken 24 hours. And so you take a longer maintenance window with your business processes, but things still worked. So in this case here, we do believe that for customers we've been watching, they increase the cache, they decrease the level of cache. They'll increase the horsepower of the controller. They'll go to beast mode for a couple of days. They won't. Here's another one. You'll do application patches to your production environment, and you'll want to test those in a non-production setting. Well, you can use your backup and recovery system that is back-ended by Zadara for the storage, and you can turn that thing into beast mode to do the fastest restore possible. But then when you're done with that restore and you're going to do that application patch testing, you go back to your Zadara storage system and you crank back the dial to normal. These options, which are not available to you in some of these other scenarios, like with the hyperscalers, to be able to increase this on a temporary basis, these options allow you now to work differently, how you'll be able to do application patch testing and things of that nature, because you can restore a lot quicker than you otherwise would be able to by just turning dials and knobs on our system. Rounding out the end of this slide, we get to thin provisioning messages, and this is where you see a wide range here. The estimate we're making is 5 to 20%, And that's because some applications can take advantage of this, some scenarios can take advantage of this, and others cannot. But I'll just share today that if you have anything that benefits from clones, and again, you might know that more often from virtualization, virtual machine hosting, for example. We're not talking in these slides today about virtual machine hosting because the hyperscalers bring their own storage for that. But we do know that an environment where you set up to be able to take advantage of a lot of snapshotting and or a clone scenario where, again, you can save cost because a clone, say you've cloned a same volume 3 times. In our enterprise storage, we'll have that clone exist once, and we'll keep track of changes of what clone 1 has from the source, clone 2 has from the source, clone 3 has from the source. Starts to sound like data reduction all over again, doesn't it? Well, that's because it's the same methodology, but clones really allow you to have an efficient use of be the same data volume. It can also be with other applications, different factors. That's why the range of 5 to 20. And then the last thing here about the economics on storage is just with the Zadara system, due to the fact that we have all of this exclusivity for each tenant, their drive controller for their virtual storage array, the drives underneath it that support that, we can give you, and we do give you, charts and graphs. You can look in the GUI, you can download these through an API, but you can see performance levels, you can see the storage latency times. There's a lot of robust information that we provide, very similar to if you were to buy a piece of hardware, like a NetApp device or a storage system or something from Dell EMC, HPE. They'll give you charts and graphs as well, but they won't be able to do that in a multi-tenant configuration, and they won't be able to make it that they're safe to play with one another. They're going to have the chance for a noisy neighbor. We've designed in our system to be able to do that and still be multi-tenant, single-tenant experience. And so we believe you can save at least 5% just on the amount of storage administration time it takes to, when you do have a question about an application and how is its storage performance working underneath that application, we give you such robust metrics down to the individual drive assembly so that you can see if there is a bottleneck on storage, where's the bottleneck, where's it coming from, and what can be done to remediate that. Again, large data lakes and large applications are the real sweet spot for that, but we're also seeing databases. You need to tune your storage underneath the database. Now we're rounding out towards the end of our economic advantages, and now we look at compute. So the first thing we talk about on compute, and this is a big number, you'll find that with the Zadara Edge Cloud solution, we have one list price for virtual machines across all of North America. So that's the United States and Canada. In fact, just to make the message simple, we have 4 prices around the world. We have the North America price, Latin America price, Europe price, and Asia Pacific price. With the hyperscalers, so Google's a little bit different than Microsoft and Amazon on this one. They'll have as many as 14 different price books around the world, and that's because everybody's priced appropriate for a given environment. In some places, Northern Europe, for example, space and power are very expensive compared to other parts of the world. The message here is that when just looking at North America for an example here, when you're looking to do an edge cloud solution and you're thinking about maybe I'll use one of the AWS local zones, we see that for an M5X large, so their prices are on their website. You'll look at Ashburn, Virginia, where they got their mega size center. It's just under 10 cents an hour for that. And if you look at Boston local zone, that same virtual machine, they charge 24 cents for. So what we're saying is that with the Zadara system, it's the same price all across North America. It's 10 cents is what that number is. And due to the fact that if you needed local service in that Northeast Boston corridor type of area, well, you could get that with Zadara. It'd be the same price as if you were buying that VM over in Ashburn or over in San Jose, California, or down in Dallas, Texas. And so this represents just starting right out of the gate, a 60% reduction, and helps you be able to have this hybrid solution around with AWS. You may be enjoying some of their other parts of their catalog, their applications, things of this nature. But when it comes to that local edge, we're recommending that you could use Zadara for that. And so this is where the economics comes into play. The next part is burst capacity. So burst capacity, this is another area where we've really worked hard to keep our model simple to understand, simple to use, and also simple to understand pricing. Pricing can be a very complex topic with a lot of the hyperscalers because they do have such a large catalog of services. There's so many considerations to make and start to plan and budget for. We make it really simple. There's a price by the hour for a virtual machine appearance, for the storage that belongs to that virtual machine, and for its elastic IP. That's how simple it is for virtual machines. When it comes to burst capacity, in the hyperscalers, they'll have reserved instances or savings plan that you've agreed to in advance, and then everything else is billed at on-demand rates. Well, for burst, as you can understand, you're not going to pay for that as a reserved or savings plan because you don't know when you're going to burst. With Zadara, maybe you're going to have test dev workloads to 6 months out of the year, sporadically in time. Well, those are workloads you can put on a Zadara Edge Cloud, and you don't have to worry about breaking the bank on using on-demand rates for that because our system, you work with us up front, we negotiate the size of consumption you'd like, we trade term for discounts on that, and then you use as much as you want. There is no on-demand price with us anymore when you do that. You're paying discounts, whether you use a lot or a little. And lastly, rounding out that message, if you do have applications that are using auto-scale groups, it's the same message again. With the hyperscalers, again, this is something that we understand is their scale, is their size. They need to know how much infrastructure thousands of customers are going to need at a given location. So the only effective way to work with that in a discounting capacity is you have to either reserve instances or pay for a savings plan or agree to a savings plan up front. And so you pay the same amount every month. And when your auto scale groups go above that, you will be paying on demand for that burst, which is okay in some cases if you're not doing it much. But if you are spending a lot of time with on-demand charges on there, we would recommend for you to do a hybrid where you connect a Zadara local edge cloud to your VPCs up in AWS, use the services you need up in AWS, and then use all the VMs that are bursting down there in your local cloud, your local edge cloud. So another one on here that's very interesting is Windows pricing. You'll see that the largest hyperscalers, they all offer Windows. In the middle tier, you'll see that your DigitalOcean's out there. There's a few others. They don't even offer a Windows licensing model. So what we've done, again, we worked really hard to keep our model simple. We have followed, for the most part, how AWS approaches Windows licensing, and that is we have a price by the hour for a Windows VM service, or we have a price by the hour for a Linux VM service. When you go for a Windows VM service, all of the hyperscalers, they'll reduce their pricing for reserved instances or savings plan, but they won't reduce that component of what the Windows component of it. Our discounting applies to everything. Discounting applies to storage. Hyperscalers won't be able to get there. The virtual machines, it applies to that. The Windows VM service, discounting goes to all of these. So if you start to get to scale with a Zadara local edge cloud, you'll see that we'll be able to get discounting that goes deeper. And that's where if you have a Windows environment, Windows, for those that may not already be familiar, if you had 100 VMs and they were Linux and it was X dollars, and you just looked at the standard pricing list for one of the hyperscalers for that same 100 VMs to be running Windows, you'll see that there's an 80% uplift in the price. And that's because there's Microsoft has delivered a tremendous ecosystem around the Windows server operating system. And so there's licensing fees and other things that have to be satisfied around that. Also, all of these organizations that are included, we have to build our own knowledge bases, maintain our drivers, maintain base images, perform security updates all the time. There's a lot of overhead that goes into supporting a Windows environment. The good news is that for those companies that are using Windows VMs, you'll typically see those be your larger enterprises. They want to move fast. A lot of that work has been done for them, and that's why you see the differences. So we see here that you're right out the gate, we can offer to larger installations of Windows VM service we can see the advantage of discounting take you even further, maybe 15% lower. The last one here is it's got the most words in it, and that's because it takes a moment to really think this one through, and that is your minimum commitment level. So with the hyperscalers, your minimum commitment level on storage, they don't discount, so they don't have a minimum level of spend on storage. But on compute in AWS, they call it the EC2 part, you can get into a savings plan or reserved instance. And if you're going to buy, if you need $5,000 a month after discounting worth of service, you'll pay $5,000 a month. Problem is that if you only need 4, you've paid for 5 every month. You've agreed to do that for 12 or 36 months. With the Zadara solution, if what you needed represented $5,000 a month of spend, we're not going to ask you for a minimum at what you expect to spend. Your minimum with us is going to be about a quarter lower than what you would see at AWS. There's 2 factors in there. Remember, I just said earlier that they don't have a minimum spend around storage because they're not giving discounting for storage. They've got all these different classes. For Zadara, again, it's just one basket. You're buying a set of services. 1 month, if you had a commitment for a certain dollar level to get to your discounting, you could consume that with storage. The next month, you could consume it with compute. The month after that, you can consume it with object storage. You're not wed to a particular service you're buying from us. And so we bring that flexibility to where your minimum that you're going to have is going to be a little bit lower than what you'll see with the hyperscalers. I'm going to take a pause for a moment here because I can see that we're approaching the 1 hour mark, and want to make sure that we leave time for Q&A towards the end. But as we wrap up on the slides here, I wanted to show you a brief mention about our public edge cloud site. So you can see here with the larger dots, those are a full stack site offering the compute, the storage, the networking. And then the smaller dots are where some of our legacy partners are offering storage as a service today. So you can do remote mirroring to another location. And we've seen over time, you're going to see those smaller dots convert to the bigger dots as they get to a full stack experience. But you can see we've got some pretty robust coverage around North America for those local type of applications. Again, local edge clouds you want to see there in Europe, got good saturation there. South Africa, I know we've got Cape Town coming around the corner. So you'll have multiple sites inside South Africa if you'd like to do edge cloud services there, and so forth and so on. Again, all these locations is the same user console, same tech stack, same services, same SLAs. And so now we have a couple of slides that this will be the leave behind. If you had more questions about what are the scope of services that Zadara offers, how does that align with? And again, we will, out of flattery to AWS, say that we've aligned ourselves most familiar to how AWS does things. So on this slide, you see we've actually leveraged some of their service names to align which services line up one to the other. And a big thank you for being a part of this presentation today. So Spencer, let's see if there's any Q&A in the online chat.
Yes, I'm looking right now, and I don't see that anybody's asked any questions. So I guess it's a testament to your presenting abilities, Jeff, that you've been thorough to the point where nobody has any questions. But anyway, that being said, I mean, thanks a lot for the presentation, Jeff. Everybody who's watching, I hope we were able to give you a good view of how Zadara works in conjunction with the hyperscaler environment. If you'd like to review this information, we're going to be making this webinar available on demand shortly via email, along with a link to speak directly with one of our cloud specialists, should you like to know more. So, if there's anything else that, any questions that pop into your head at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're thinking about this, please use that link to schedule some time to speak with them. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming to the webinar today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you again.